Welcome to the Independent Advisors Podcast, where we dive into the world of stocks, tradable markets, and financial planning with Jessup Wealth Management's Chief Investment Officer, Mark McEvely, and CEO, Matt Jessup. You'll hear tips, tricks, and strategies to address your financial well-being, and most importantly, conveyed in a way that everyone can understand. Here are your hosts, Mark and Matt.
Welcome to episode 302 of the Independent Advisors Podcast, where Mark McEvely and I, Matt Jessup, bring you everything you need to know from the past week in the world of financial markets and financial planning. Today, we're diving into the topic that impacts nearly every aspect of modern life, plastics. From the packaging that protects our food to the components in our vehicles, medical equipment, and technology, plastics play a vital role in the American economy and our daily routines. But alongside the convenience and innovation that comes growing scrutiny, environmental concerns, waste management challenges, and a call for more sustainable solutions. Joining us today are two organizations leading the charge in innovation and responsibility in this space. Alterra, a company revolutionizing how we recycle hard to recycle plastics using advanced technology, and the American Chemistry Council, a national trade association advocating for responsible policies and practices in the chemical and plastic industries. We'll explore the real story behind plastics, their economic impact, their role in sustainability, and the innovations that are changing how we produce, use, and renew them. Whether you're an investor, a policymaker, or simply a curious listener, I think today's conversation will help you better understand the critical role the industry plays in the U.S. and globally. I would like for you to welcome Jeremy DeBenedictis. He's president of Alterra to the podcast, as well as Ross Eisenberg. He's president of the America's Plastic Makers at the American Chemistry Council. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's going to be a fun conversation, good roundtable. I've planned some good questions that I think is going to educate our viewers and our podcast listeners. Briefly, I'm going to go over pricing for our regular listeners. And we do this every week on the Independent Advisors Podcast, as we tend to talk about the financial markets. So I'll dig right in. S&P 500 month to date through last night's close. Data sources Y charts as of market close on May 28th. S&P 500 up 5.7%. Year to date up 0.1%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 3.5% for the month, and year to date down 1% even. The NASDAQ Composite up 9.5% month to date and down 1.1% for the year. The iShares Russell 2000 ETF representing small caps for the month up 5.5%. For the year down 7%. The Vanguard FTSE All World ex-United States ETF for the month up 4.5%. Year to date up 13.4%. Checking in on the bond markets, the 3-month Treasury bill, 4.35, the 2-year rate, 3.96, and the 10-year at 4.47. So before we get into the show, listeners, if you've been enjoying the Independent Advisors Podcast for a while and want to take the next step in your financial journey, I'd encourage you to head to our website, jessupwealthmanagement.com. I myself, Matt Jessup, offer a 15-minute initial call where you can discuss your financial goals and see if JWM is a good fit for your needs. Scheduling is easy. Once you land at the jessupwealthmanagement.com page, just click Schedule Initial Call and select a time that works best for you. It's a quick survey to fill out. It'll help guide the conversation and ensure your time is used efficiently. Again, jessupwealthmanagement.com. So let's go into these roundtable questions, gentlemen. I think this is going to be really, really good for our listeners and viewers. You know, the first segment that I wanted to discuss with you both is just kind of understanding plastics and their importance. So, the first question I like to present to both of you and feel comfortable to answer first is, can you explain the role of plastics in our daily lives and why they are considered essential materials?
Sure, I'm happy to take that one. And this is Ross, by the way, with the American Chemistry Council. So we represent the manufacturers of the plastic, the folks who take it from raw materials to the plastic pellets, which we then ship off to all of the different the dark containers and sort of the everybody everywhere that turns it into all of the things that we use. And really that is the key to this. I mean, all of the things that we use. Plastics are remarkably versatile, remarkably durable. They are in every facet of our life. And that's largely because they are often the most sustainable choice. They're often the cheapest option. They're often, frankly, the most environmentally friendly option. And that's because you can do more with less of them. So to put that in perspective, your car is about half plastic in terms of its volume, but the weight of it is only about 10% of the weight. And it's just as safe as it was when it was all steel and things like that, but you're able to do more with less because you can put that plastic in there. But when it comes to the packaging on your meat, the sleeve for that cucumber, if you've ever wondered why that sleeve is there for that cucumber, it dramatically extends the life of that cucumber, and then takes something that would be a couple days in your fridge and turns it into like weeks in your fridge, which cuts down on food waste, saves water, saves all this stuff. So so typically in those areas, and then life-saving devices, right? I mean, all the PPE, all the medical equipment, the medical devices, things of that nature, your home, your insulation, your windows, things like that. It's in everything, and it's in everything because it is so effective and so versatile. So I mean, really, the question is, what isn't plastic in, right? I mean, it is such a ubiquitous part of our life, and we tend to take it for granted, and we tend to think of it as just as that plastic bottle, but it is everywhere, and it is really empowering modern life.
Well said, Ross. Jeremy, what's your thoughts on the topic?
I think what I would add to that is just that, we talk about inflation a lot, and plastic is, I believe, a very deflationary commodity when you look at someone who's in the grocery store. So think about it, you just went shopping, your cart's completely full. I have 3 kids, so when we go grocery shopping, it's amazing that it all fits in one cart, and it's all packaged in plastic. As Ross said, it's so that we can keep the food safe, preserved, and it can be on the shelf longer. Those all reduce the costs. But imagine if everything in your cart was packaged in cardboard, glass, and metal. First off, I would need 3 more carts just to get through the checkout line with everything. And secondly, the cost of it would be 2 or 3 times more. So without plastics, we don't have the way of life that we all enjoy right now.
That's a great point, Jeremy. And I'll go right back to you, and I want Ross's opinion on this. I mean, what do you think are some of the common misperceptions about plastic that you both would like to address?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception that we hear, and it really hits my heartstrings, is that recycling doesn't work, because that's completely false. Recycling does work. And in fact, when you look at the data, you'll see for plastics that 10% of plastics are recycled, but it's really a bifurcated number. When you split it and you think about your plastic water bottles, your milk jugs, your laundry detergent containers, 30 to 35% of those are recycled out of households. And those numbers are from the Recycling Partnership. They do a study every year, and they survey thousands of households across the US. And so 35% of water bottles, milk jugs, laundry detergent bottles are being recycled. The issue is films and flexibles, or plastic packaging, the stuff that's in your pantries, what's in our chip bags, our granola wrappers, our pretzel containers. All this plastic that's behind me here on the shelf is actually from my household kitchen. We'll talk more about what we do with it later, but all of that plastic gets recycled at 0.1%.
Wow.
So when we talk about recycling's not working, it's only 10%, really, it's recycling does work. We need an end market for all of this stuff to make the rest of it, to incentivize people to recycle this. And I think, you might say 35% seems like not a high number, but when you think about cardboard and aluminum pop cans and glass, out of households at least, not industry, but out of households, it also is about 35% coming from that same report. So to get from 35% to a little bit higher, it really involves a lot more access to recycling, and it involves the human decision that we all make when we have something that could be recycled. Do we put it in the right spot or not? Do we gotta get lazy and throw it away, or do we get it in the recycling bin? And we can all do that. I can be at a volleyball tournament with my daughter, and we've got 6 Powerade bottles there, and they're all empty, and there's of course no recycling bin to put them in. So do you make the decision to take those home and get them into your curbside recycling, get them recycled or not? So I think that's the number one misconception, I think, is recycling is happening. It works. We need to get more access to it. We need to get more on the front end to get more of the material into the hands of the technology that Ross and I would love to talk about.
Love tackling that. I think it is a big misconception. Ross, what's your thoughts on the topic, sir?
Yeah, so everything Jeremy said. I mean, the one thing I will add is sort of, and as we sort of dig into how you solve that problem, I think there's a misperception that this is a uniquely U.S. problem, right? That the U.S. is polluting the world and sending all of our plastic everywhere, and that is causing, the ocean plastic and all that stuff. And I don't want to minimize our role in it. I mean, we are a developed country. Plastic doesn't belong in the environment. It just doesn't, right? We need to get it out of the environment, and we're committed to that. At the same time, the U.S. and EU combined really contribute less to 1% of the pollution entering our environment. The issue, I mean, there's a third of the world that doesn't even have basic waste management services, right? Like the ability to actually do anything with the waste once it's generated. So we're not going to solve the plastic pollution issue until we solve some basic waste management issues around the world. And that includes in our country too. I mean, there's 7,000 different jurisdictions picking up 7,000 different things. Day to day, I don't even know what my blue bins actually, what goes in and out anymore, right? I mean, sometimes it's glass, sometimes it's not. I know which plastics go in, but I should because I do this for a living. But I mean, realistically, the issue is basic waste management and upgrading that infrastructure here and around the world will contribute to solving this issue. It's not just a U.S. issue; it's really a global issue.
Well, let's add to that, Ross. So my last kind of question in this segment, I'll let you start, is, how do plastics contribute to sustainability efforts such as reducing greenhouse gas emissions and conserving energy? I know it's lightweight, but talk about kind of the efficiency side of why it's such a popular usage in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, so it's that sort of duo of cost and environmental performance, right? I mean, it just kind of outperforms everything. You think about coffee, right? You can get your coffee in a can, you can get your coffee in the pouch, and the pouch is always going to have a lower carbon footprint because you have less material, and it's essentially you're using less to make that pouch, and it'll perform exactly the same. Pretty much every economist, every researcher that looks at this issue always kind of lands in the same spot, whether it's McKinsey or the DOE or anybody else. They always kind of basically, the answer is the same, that on pretty much all of the same applications, food packaging, bottles, things of that nature, plastic's always going to perform better than the alternatives. And from a greenhouse gas, from a climate standpoint, usually by an order of magnitude. So an aluminum can has double the greenhouse gases of a plastic bottle. Right? The end of life issues are different for those two things. Aluminum gets recycled higher, but from a pure carbon standpoint, that plastic bottle is going to be better for the for the climate. A metal pet food can has 3 times the plastic pouch. A glass 1 liter bottle is about 20 times the carbon footprint of that plastic bottle. So you kind of see where I'm going here, and that applies really across the board on things. And that really is the key here. You use plastic, you tend to have a lower front end carbon footprint, and so you're doing better for the environment on that. We need to fix the end of life issues, but if we can, then it becomes a win across the board.
Now, Jeremy, I got some questions for you coming up. It's going to talk about kind of the recycling side of things. Anything you'd like to add to that question before I transition to the next one, Jeremy?
No, I think it's simply you get more from less, right? You get more value and usage from less material, and that's why it's sustainable.
See, I love that we tackled this off the get-go because I do think there's just a lot of just misconceptions by the American public on the topic. And I think the information you provided, and then Ross, some of the specific data points that you gave, I think are going to be very enlightening for our viewers and listeners. So let's transition to segment 2. I'm going to call this kind of innovations in recycling and the circular economy. So, Jeremy, I'm going to start with you, sir. Your firm, Alterra, utilizes a process called infinity cycling, and I want to make sure I pronounce that properly. But could you elaborate on how this technology works and its impact on recycling, but especially the hard to recycle plastics?
Yeah, absolutely. With inficycling, what we're really trying to get to is how do we infinitely cycle this material back into the economy? So how do we always keep the material in play? Plastic is made from oil. We frack for oil, we drill for oil, and then we bury discarded plastics back into the earth. So we're actually burying oil in the form of plastic back into the earth when we don't allow it to be recycled. So our technology really is around infinitely recycling it. So we take discarded plastics like those behind me, and you can see some major brand owners behind me. You can see chip bags, you can see bread bags, bags that hold grapes, fruits, vegetables, all those types of things. But we take that type of discarded plastic that would otherwise have been in a landfill or even used as a fuel or incinerated at a waste to energy facility. And so we divert that material to our process. So the first step really is that this material is size reduced and densified, and then it's conveyed into the process where we indirectly heat them. So what does that mean? Think about how you heat up water in your hot water tank. The heat is around the vessel. It's never in contact with the water, of course. And so we heat this material up indirectly. And on a molecular level, the plastic bonds crack and they go from a solid and then they become a liquid. And then from there, they crack some more and it goes from a liquid and then becomes a vapor. And that's important. That phase change from solid to liquid to vapor is important because what we're really doing is we're separating the valuable hydrocarbons for the other impurities that made the plastic. So think about if you've got a green bag.
Yeah.
Well, that green material was dyes and fillers and other impurities that were added to the hydrocarbons to make that pouch or that plastic container.
Yes.
And so if we're going to get the valuable materials out, the hydrocarbons, we really need to separate it from the impurities. And so that's what we're doing is basically a phase change separation. So then that vapor is condensed later on in the process and becomes a liquid. And we simply ship that liquid back to the petrochemical industry as a replacement for virgin fossil derived material. And then they further refine it into new plastics and other valuable products.
That is awesome. I mean, it's a very enlightening. I mean, Ross, I mean, with your kind of vantage point, you're the president of the American Plastic Makers at the American Chemistry Council. What are some of the challenges or even opportunities that exist in implementing this type of advanced recycling technologies, but on a larger scale?
So, I mean, one of the most important ones that I tend to be involved in, and again, I'm a Washington person. I'm kind of a swamp creature. I've lobbyist for the past 25 years, and so we deal in government and we deal in policy, and really trying to sort of make that work well for industry. And it is not working well for industry in this space, right? The regulatory uncertainty, in particular, for advanced recycling technologies, has gotten in the way of this market, right? And needs to be cleared. So just like anything else, this should be, it's a manufacturing process. It competes just like other manufacturing processes. But because it has to do with plastic, and because there is such increased attention on plastic, we've seen tremendous, I don't know what the word is, activity, misinformation, kind of all of the things coming from different corners of Washington, and from sort of NGO communities that are making it hard for regulators to figure out what to do about this. And
it seems to be like a recycled kind of topic that just kind of recycles the misconception. Is that a fair way of saying it, Ross?
Yeah, it's exactly right. So every time, I make a point of going to a lot of these sort of conferences where some of our opponents are, and every single time, and they usually stand up and say, well, we're experts on advanced recycling, and it's this and it's that, and it's all of these things. And the very first thing I say is, okay, raise your hand if you've ever been to an advanced recycling facility. And the only person in that room that raises their hand is me. And so folks are holding themselves out as experts on a topic where they really have no real knowledge of what it is. And it's funny because when I go visit the Alterras and the Nexuses and sort of these smaller advanced recyclers that are really startups in a lot of ways and are really kind of taking on new technology, it's people that are dedicated to solving a problem, right? I mean, you have a bunch of engineers that are saying, man, I got into this because I wanted to solve this problem. And why is everybody attacking me for it? I'm trying to actually get this stuff out of the environment, get it out of the rivers. And so I just wish there was kind of that meeting of the minds here that yes, this is evolving technology, but we can evolve it together and we can answer your questions. And the bottom line is that this is good and it's for a really good purpose. And we should be for this, right? Because there is no option B. There literally is no option B.
Yeah, there's no other option. But if we can embrace this and continue to innovate on the technological side, firms like Alterra and what they're doing, I can see where you're starting to get rid of kind of the misconceptions that are around it. And, Jeremy, back to you. I mean, how does the concept of the circular economy apply to plastics, and what steps are being taken to achieve it? I know you've talked about it a little bit so far, but any other comments you can share with our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, I think, before we get there, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities and challenges that are there. One of the biggest opportunities we have is that we live in a mainly linear economy where we take resources, we make something, we use it, and then we dispose of it. And so what this set of technologies does is it really closes that loop. And so it connects the waste side to the make side. So at the end of the day, when you're done with your potato chip bag and you throw it away, it goes to a waste management company and then it ends up in a landfill, right? And when they make a new potato chip bag, they got to go extract virgin fossil material to go make that bag.
Yes,
And
sir.
all we're doing is connecting the $150 billion waste management industry to the $1 trillion petrochemical refining industry. That's what these little startups are doing. We're connecting a $150 billion industry to a $1 trillion industry. We're taking what would have went into the landfill, we're converting it back into oil, which replaces virgin oil, and giving it back to the plastic manufacturers to make it back into those bags, those plastic packaging, and everything else. So I think that kind of defines the closed loop or circular system that we're trying to do at the end of the day, is just connect those two pieces of the value chain and
Yes.
take that linear value chain and bend it back around so it can be used again. And I mean, it's incredibly exciting. It's been a long journey, as Ross kind of alluded to. I've been in it for 15 years now, and it's similar to other technologies, EVs, solar, wind. You got to start somewhere, and you need help eventually. There's high capital costs because we're early on in the cycle.
Yep.
There's regulatory and policy barriers. There's, as humans, we make things way more complex than they have to be. There's over 9,000 different recycling programs in the US. So we just inherently confused everybody. And now we've got to undo that, re-educate, and explain how things can be circular again. But what makes it really exciting is that there is so much material we can do that with. And that's one of the reasons, as Ross said, some of us have got involved and have a lot of passion for it, because it's really working on a problem that's bigger than any of us. And it's going to take a long time to solve this because it took a long time to get there. And you need lots of systems in the entire value chain to get there. But how exciting that you could work in this industry. Someone graduating from the University of Dayton right now could get into this industry and you could spend your entire career in it, because that's how much growth is still there and how early on we are in the marketplace. And you can retire 40 years from now working in the circular economy and realize that you worked on something that's going to carry on to the next generation and it was much bigger than yourself.
Well said, Jeremy. Very motivating as well. I mean, Ross, from your kind of angle, are you seeing companies and brands wanting to embrace utilizing more recycled technology for a multitude of reasons? What's your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a clear premium on recycled content. We're seeing certainly at the policy level, there's a number of states that have either enacted or are considering enacted sort of recycled content mandates. So that is driving some of that. But even without that, companies, the big brand companies, the Cokes, the Pepsis, the Procter and Gambles, they are setting goals for themselves to integrate circular products, recycled content into their packaging, and they've got to meet them, right? So that is driving this market. That's driving demand. On the flip side, I'm seeing more entrance into that market, right? I mean, so I a long time ago, back when I got started in this business, I was at the forefront, sort of on the beginning end of the sort of the shale gas revolution. And we all kind of remember when that popped, right? All of a sudden, what people were kind of talking about in corners became a very, very mainstream thing. And then the big companies started buying in and everybody started really kind of pouncing on it. My hope is that we are getting close to that point here, right? I mean, I don't really know, but the stars are starting to align and you can see a pathway where all of a sudden it's going to pop, and it's not just going to be something that we're talking about, that this is a new and incoming technology. It's a thing that is happening and companies are investing in it, and it's in the market.
Ross, you're teeing me up perfectly for my next segment, because let's talk about the economic impact and the policy considerations. I think as this does go mainstream, you use the analogy about shale, which I think is a great analogy. How significant is the plastics industry to the American economy in terms of job creation and economic output?
Yeah. So the industry itself has about 700,000 people, just shy of 700,000 people, just in the sort of the manufacturing side of it. And that's in resin and product manufacturing. You go beyond that to sort of the rest of the value chain, that number gets a lot bigger. You're well over 1 million. But it's every state of the union. I mean, we are a core part of this. About 26% of all manufacturing plastics contribute to that. We also have a trade surplus. So as we're talking about trade and tariffs and all of these things, we've got a $20+ billion trade surplus. And to bring it back to the energy side, plastics is an energy story, right? So, and particularly where you're situated, we have all this shale gas in Pennsylvania and Ohio and all of these places that we never thought we had before. Well, that was going to lead to more manufacturing because it gives you a competitive advantage on your inputs. Plastics is one of those industries where the natural gas coming from shale is a tremendously valuable input. So now all of a sudden, manufacturing plastics in the United States is considerably more competitive than anywhere else in the world. So over the past 15 years, you've seen plastics really kind of blossom in the United States, whereas it really wasn't prior to shale gas. And so, a manufacturing state like Ohio, we're big there, and it's not a coincidence, right? The energy is there for a reason, and it's going into plastics, and the industry is thriving because of it.
And that's a big angle, Ross, that I think is not really being talked about in the space. And I'm glad that you brought it up and explained that to our listeners and viewers in the podcast, because I think it's important. Jeremy, before I go to the next question, any input you'd like to give, sir?
Yeah, I would just say, and these are good jobs. These are sustainable, clean jobs that really are next level. And so you're looking at a lot of engineering roles that are being created. You're looking at operator roles that are turning into technician roles, control room operators, and really trying to leverage the next generation of technology. I keep going back to like where we were 20, 30 years ago when wind and solar and EVs were taking off. And to me, it feels similar. And I agree with Ross. Something's about the pop, and it really is up to the public and to policymakers to help fuel the entrepreneurs to take it to the next level.
Yeah, and I think individuals that work in this industry, the individuals on the front line, these are good jobs. These are good American jobs. And I think that's wonderful that you both are highlighting that. A couple more questions. What policies or regulations are currently influencing the plastics industry, and how do they affect innovation and sustainability efforts?
Yeah.
Let's educate our listeners a little bit deeper.
You want to take that first, Jeremy? I'm happy to hop in anytime.
I'll start high level, I think, and then maybe you can go into some of the details. But I think, Matt, overall, regulation can sometimes seem burdensome, but when it's done well and it's transparent and it's science-based, it actually supports innovation, it supports investment, it supports market credibility, especially for emerging technologies and sectors like us. Like we talked about, that there is a high capex to building these plants. I mean, these are $100 to $200 million facilities. Yes. And so you need transparent, clear, science-based regulation, laws, incentives in place so investors can invest and the market can take over and growth capital can do what it's supposed to do to an emerging technology. And I think that's all we're looking for at the end of the day, is to have a level playing field with other technologies and to have some clear transparency along the way.
Well said, Jeremy. Ross?
So one of the biggest challenges, I'm sure, as to getting any industry off the ground is being able to build it, right? And actually getting the permits to build it and operate those facilities. And, if you can drag out a permit for something, you can usually stop it from happening. And that's one of those ways that regulatory uncertainty that I referred to earlier kind of comes to fruition. And one of the really unfortunate things that happened, frankly, in the last administration was they didn't necessarily know how to handle the issue. They had criticisms coming in and questions about how it should be regulated for its chemical properties and for the outputs coming out of the facility and for the emissions coming out of there. And the data is all available, right? I mean, that's not really an issue. And quite frankly, these are pretty small footprint facilities. Like there's one in Atlanta. It's literally next door to a Great American Cookie Company. Like, I mean, these are not, they're in office parks. So we're not talking about, the big smokestack kind of manufacturing. But at the same time, EPA didn't really know how to handle it. And the politicals didn't want to make a decision. They didn't want to upset their friends. And so they just said, we're not going to touch this for a while. And that creates the uncertainty, so that when the Alterras of the world have to get a permit and renew their permit, nobody knows what to do. And so one thing we are seeing out of the current administration is a willingness to dig into this, right? And say, okay, we need to actually figure out what the rules of the road are so that companies can actually get these things permitted and built. And so we're seeing a lot of progress on, how TSCA, the chemical law, applies to the inputs and outputs coming out of the facility, particularly the outputs and what's in it, how emissions are governed, right? We've done, any number of studies telling them what's coming out of these facilities. And so, and quite frankly, it's pretty darn minimal. The pyrolysis is an enclosed process for instance, what Alterra uses. And so there's really not that much in terms of fugitive emissions, but there are some, and they're governed by law and they're permitted by law. So putting that all out there, letting the laws kind of govern it as manufacturing, and being able to kind of get on with it. That's really our biggest deal here, is like, let this thing compete and see if it floats. And
It
so
makes sense. The
EPA can
industry
help.
needs more predictability from a policy standpoint. And once that happens, you guys can play by those rules and start to
Right.
flourish a little bit more, right?
Precisely. And EPA has been helpful in that respect lately.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy, I was going to ask a question about just the collaboration between industry leaders, policymakers, and how that can drive sustainability. I think Ross kind of talked about that. Before I go into kind of final thoughts, any other comments, Jeremy, you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex problem that we're solving at the end of the day, and it involves the entire value chain. So like we talked about before, all the way from extracting materials from the ground to producing plastics to making a plastic container. And then we kind of hit this earlier on, but it involves the human decision at some point. At some point, we all have a plastic packaging in our hand, and we have to make a decision on what we do with that. Do we throw it out the window as we're driving and it goes into the environment? Do we put it into a trash can because we didn't want to spend the time to put the plastic water bottle in the recycling bin, or do we put it in a recycling bin? So, I think there's a lot of education that still needs to happen. And as Ross kind of talked about too, access to that and having a better waste management infrastructure across the world. We do it really well in the US. But I think to take it to the next level, we need to engage everyone from designing plastic packaging so it can be reused. It's designed to be reused. All the way to the consumer who's consuming the product and has to do something with the plastic packaging when it's at end of life.
Well said, Jeremy. I love talking about this kind of part of it after we tackled the misconceptions, talked about this economic impact, talk about the regulatory environment that you both have to deal with day to day. As we kind of transition to final thoughts, Ross, I'll start with you. What's kind of your vision for the future of the plastics in the economy, and what actionable or steps would you like to see?
Yeah, so for us, it's circularity, and I realize that's a word that doesn't come up in normal conversation. So I'll kind of explain what that means in our view. It is cradle to grave, right? It's designing the product better, having better infrastructure to collect it and sort it, having, as Jeremy said, the user know what to do with it and make that conscious decision to actually recycle it, and then having the technologies in place to actually recycle it and get it back in there, so that you're displacing every one of those barrels of oil with a barrel of essentially plastic waste, and creating this circular stream. Because with this technology, you can do that forever and ever and always with the plastics they're recycling. And so that's our vision, and we've committed as an industry to some pretty aggressive goals by 2030 and 2040 to have the plastic that we are putting into the economy be essentially recyclable, recoverable, circular. And so that's our vision. How we get there, that's anyone's guess, right?
Yes.
There's a big role for policy here, and I think
Yes.
I want to kind of go take this to a conciliatory place. I mentioned earlier that I was involved in sort of the climate debate for a long time, and that got real ugly, and it's still pretty ugly, quite frankly. I think the public generally feels like we should be doing something about climate, but you have two very entrenched positions on either side, dedicated to the fight. Either fight to do something super aggressive or fight to do something not aggressive at all. And we're just not getting anything done, right? It's not getting better. We're not solving the problem. Here we are 20 years later, and we're still fighting over the regulations we were doing 20 years ago. That can't happen on plastic. That cannot happen on plastic. There needs to be this workable middle to actually solve it. This industry wants to solve it. The reason I took this job is because the industry actually wants to solve this problem. We're just looking for some dance partners to do it. And there's plenty of ways to get there. Extended producer responsibility. There's tons of ways to do it that are happening all over the world and that we could adopt in the US. But the bottom line is that this is a very solvable problem. We got to modernize infrastructure. We just need a meeting of the minds to do it. And we're looking for friends that are willing to actually work with us on it.
Well said, Ross. Well said. And I think it's motivational. And I think that's a good vision. And I think it has to happen. And I embrace that. Jeremy?
Yeah, I think, we're privileged to live in the US. We have a lot of land. And the issue with that is it's also a crux. And the crux is that it's easy to landfill things. It's really cheap. It's really cheap to landfill a lot of valuable material. And so our vision at Alterra is really that plastics are no longer treated as disposable, but as valuable materials within this circular economy that we've talked about, where plastics are either reused or recycled. They're designed from the start with end of life in mind, right from inception.
Yep.
And there's infrastructure that exists to recapture and repurpose the materials at scale. And the policymakers, the innovators, and the consumers are all aligned to really eliminate plastic pollution and decouple it from fossil fuels. Let's stop burying oil in the ground in the form of plastic, and let's just keep that plastic above ground and keep that oil above ground and in use as much as we can. And so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a world we envision that we no longer landfill plastics, we no longer incinerate plastics. They're very valuable materials, and we view them differently. And so when you're walking down the street and you see a piece of litter and it's a piece of plastic, you want to pick it up because you understand that there's value there and it should not be there anymore. And that's what we're really fighting for every day.
Jeremy, well said. Well said. So, as we get to the end of the podcast here, Jeremy, I'll start with you and then we'll end with Ross. Where can listeners go if they want to follow you and your organization's work?
Yeah, you could go to our website, Alterra360.com. We're also on all the socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and X. And you know what? If you're ever in the Akron area, you might just find us outside picking up some litter. We think that the most humblest thing to do is pick up someone else's litter. And my recommendation for everyone is to go out there and pick up some litter. It does three things for you at the end of the day. It puts things in perspective because you're picking up someone's mess that you didn't do. It's an act of quiet service, kind of going out there and putting your ego aside to do the right thing. And it challenges your judgment. We've all made mistakes in life. Whoever put that litter there in the first place made that mistake. We all make mistakes as humans, but you're doing the right thing and picking it back up, not judging, and putting that litter in the right spot, whether it's a water bottle or an aluminum pop can, whatever it is. So you might find us just out and about in Akron as well.
Well said, Jeremy. About a month ago, I'm a part of the Dayton Rotary Club, and the organization, we do a lot of giving back to the community. And one of those events is we did a river cleanup, and the Miami Valley Water Conservation Society, one of our secretary, Sarah Hippenstein Hall, is a part of that organization. She organized it. And we did a river cleanup for 2-3 hours on a Saturday morning, brought my family, and it was great. It was wonderful. Ross, where can listeners go if they want to follow you and your organization? I know you're trying to make a huge impact in the DC area, and you got years of experience doing this. How can listeners and viewers learn more, sir?
Great, I appreciate it. So plasticmakers.org is our website. You can see what we're putting out there. We have lots of fact sheets on what recycling is, what advanced recycling is, kind of separating fact from fiction, all of that stuff, and you can learn a lot from there, and you can see what we're dedicated to. At Plastic Makers on and then myself is at Eisenberg_Ross on X, and then Plastic Makers and Ross Eisenberg on LinkedIn.
Great, and Jenna will put links for a lot of these, your organizations and you individually. We'll make sure we tag you as well in all of our social media sites that we post this content, so our listeners and viewers can follow you too. Gentlemen, thank you for sacrificing part of your morning to share this message that I think is very important. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Matt.
Thank you for listening to episode number 302 of the Independent Advisors Podcast. Mark and I will be back with you next week for episode 303, normal format. We'll bring you up to speed on the markets, everyone. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Independent Advisors Podcast. If you're interested in hearing more, hit the subscribe button so you can be notified every time a new episode gets released. Feel free to share with friends, family, and follow us on Twitter at Jessup Wealth, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Mark and Matt will continue to share beneficial information on these social media sites. Also, check out the podcast tab on their website. That's www.jessupwealthmanagement.com. There you'll find links to every episode of the Independent Advisors. Have questions or topics you want to discuss on the show? Message us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or send an email with the words questions and topics in the subject line to inquiries@jessupwealthmanagement.com. We'll talk about it right here on the podcast. Certain sections of this commentary may contain forward-looking statements based on reasonable expectations, estimates, projections, and assumptions. Forward-looking statements are not guarantees of future performance and involve certain risks and uncertainties which are difficult to predict. All indices are unmanaged and are not available for direct investment by the public. Past performance is not indicative of future results. This podcast is provided for general informational purposes only and does not constitute either tax, legal, or financial advice. Although we do go to great lengths to make sure our information is accurate and useful, we recommend you consult a tax preparer, professional tax advisor, financial advisor, or lawyer regarding your specific circumstances. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. No strategy can guarantee any objective or goal will be achieved.